Mayor and council members, you are now live on YouTube and it is 4:59.
Okay, it's 5 o'clock. So I want to welcome everyone to this evening's Monday, May 17th virtual workshop meeting of the Livermore City Council. Could we have a call? I'd like to call the meeting to order. Could we have a roll call, please?
Councilmember Bonanno. Here. Councilmember Carling.
Here.
Councilmember Kick. Here. Vice Mayor Monroe.
Here.
Mayor Warner.
Here. So it's a workshop. So what we have is public comment is just limited to the workshop topic. And I'll open that in a second. But before I do that, I just want to remind everyone that next week is the 24th. And that's when we'll be dealing with the Eden housing proposal. And I expect it to be a lot of comment based on history and recent meetings. And so I would like everybody to be prepared to limit their comments to 1 minute if necessary. So just be prepared. And that will be, the whole point is to allow as many people to speak as possible. So I'm asking everybody to be respectful, both in their comments and of everyone's time. So with that, could we have City Clerk, would you let people know how they can participate in public comment tonight?
Yes, thank you, Mayor. Tonight we are using the Zoom meeting platform. When participating in this portion of tonight's meeting, one comment may be given per person regarding only the special meeting item on the agenda. Members of the public can participate by using the raise hand feature or *9 if you're calling in when the item begins. Please do not wait until the public comment period opens to raise your hand. Instead, raise your hand now. Once public comment opens, each participant's name will be announced and their 3 minutes will begin upon being unmuted. Please note, speakers are called upon in the order they raise their hand. However, if a speaker lowers their hand prior to providing their comment and then re-raises their hand, the system automatically places them at the end of the list. The mayor will announce the conclusion of the public comment period after comments have been voiced into the record. Thank you, Mayor.
Okay, do we have any members of the public that wish to speak on our workshop item 3.1?
Yes, sir. Carl Wente. Carl, please unmute yourself.
Hello, Carl Wente here. I just want to take this opportunity to thank those who serve the greater good, the government of the people, for the people, by the people, and the great city staff that we have. Fiscal planning is such a key part of what you all do. And I think looking, as I've only been born witness for now 4 years, but the fiscal responsibility is such a key and sometimes unspoken part of, as I listen to my generation, and what is important to my generation is fiscal responsibility and setting ourselves up to take care of aging infrastructure and through capital to prioritize appropriately and to spend money in a pragmatic way, thinking about the future and thinking about what is left behind. So I just want to thank you for the time that you all put into these very important things and let you know that even if it's one citizen that is speaking at this public forum, how much we care and how important this is to what you do. So I appreciate you all, and just to double down on the staff of City of Livermore, awesome people that do awesome things. I just continually am impressed by how you work, how responsive you are, answering questions, wanting to serve your constituents, your community through and through. So thank you. And again, elected officials, I appreciate it. What you do of the people, for the people, by the people, good government functions because good people leaning in and giving their time. Peace out, y'all. Happy Monday.
And that concludes public comment.
Okay, I'll close the public comment and we're on to agenda item 3.1, the proposed fiscal year 2021-23 financial plan. Could we have the staff report, please?
Honorable Mayor, this is Mark Roberts, your city manager, and Mayor and members of the City Council. We're pleased to present your draft budget this evening. Tonight, we're going to go through a process of presenting both the operating budget. Your Administrative Services Director, Douglas Alessio, will be leading us through that document. And then our city engineer, Bob Venn, will be leading us through the capital improvement program. Together, these documents lay out a blueprint for spending over the next 2 years. First of all, I want to note somewhat of the obvious that during this budget period, this last year and these coming 2 years, we are dealing with the results of a sharp and significant recession. You'll remember that for the past 7 years prior to that, we had been diligently preparing the city for a recession. We know that the economy is cyclical, and we have planned ahead for this eventuality. Of course, like all recessions, this one was unique. It was brought on, at least in modern times, by an unprecedented event, a worldwide pandemic, and was the sharpest and furthest drop in economic activity that we'd seen in modern times. And the only good news out of that is the fundamentals underneath the economy remained relatively sound during this period of time. Of course, our challenge at the local, state, and national level was to preserve the ability of the economy to reopen and return to production once the threat of the pandemic had passed. And you took proactive steps during the pandemic to help with our local business community and to help with residents who were specifically and dramatically impacted by the pandemic. Leading out in front of state and federal help in many times, the city did place resources there to preserve the community and help us through this particular very sharp economic recession. The good news is you'll hear from Mr. Alessio is this particular economic event appears to actually, while it had a devastatingly sharp beginning, we also are expecting, and we're beginning to see signs of it out there in the economy, of a relatively sharp recovery. So the planning that this council and councils before it had put into making certain that we had sound financial resources to make it through this recession meant that here at the city, we did have the resources to help our community make it through this. We also did not have to lay off staff. There were no forced furloughs. There were no unpaid leaves that were imposed on staff. So you were able to maintain the service level, which the community depended on, through this entire event. And so this was essentially the positive outcome of that prudent planning that we have done over the past years here. So you will, however, see that the recession did have a significant impact on the resources that we do have available moving forward. And for that reason, this coming 2-year budget is relatively tight. You also have priorities with which you wanted to make significant progress on significant capital projects, especially related to your downtown. So as we walk through the overall spending plan, of course, this is based upon and driven by your council goals and priorities. This budget, of course, is designed to implement the work programs that you have accepted based on those priorities. And we expect to spend the evening going through, at least at a high level, overall, the financial health and the spending plan for the community as we move forward over these next 2 years. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Mr. Alessio, our Administrative Services Director, who's going to start the process by leading us through the operating budget and letting us know where we are and what the budget actually includes going forward. Mr. Alessio?
Thank you, Mr. Roberts. I'm going to share my screen. All right, everyone can see that? Great. So good evening, Mayor and members of the council. This is Douglas Alessio, your Administrative Services Director. As Mark indicated, I'm going to review our proposed financial plan for the next 2 years. So that would be the cover. We wanted to highlight the downtown as a significant portion of the spending over the next 2 years will be focused on the downtown. So that's what the actual budget document looks like. So the first thing I get asked by everybody is, what is the financial impact of the pandemic? So I've got a chart here to help walk through the impact of the pandemic so that we can address that as we get started. So what you're seeing in front of you is not related to a specific financial period. It's not last fiscal year. It's not just this fiscal year. It's a portion of last fiscal year, all of this fiscal year, and the next 2 fiscal years. That is the period which is covered by the data on this chart. So you'll see that the far left column marked as sales tax. We are expecting that over the course of the pandemic event, our sales tax will be negatively impacted by $18.2 million. So before anybody knew what COVID was, the city every year produces long-term financial projections. So we did long-term financial projections for all of our revenues prior to COVID and the pandemic occurring. And this is a comparison of our long-term financial projections before COVID and what we believe to be the case now. And so for sales tax purposes, the city is going to be losing out over that time period on $18.2 million of sales tax. And hotel tax, again, is about $8.1 million. We did receive some federal grant funding of $1.1 million, the CARES Act, which is the next column. We had a local business grant program to help businesses in the local economy, help them weather the pandemic, to pivot to new ways of doing business. And that impact was $2 million. We had a salary savings over the course of the pandemic. When the pandemic started last spring, we weren't quite sure how to recruit vacant positions. And it took us a bit of time to get comfortable with doing remote recruitments. And as a result, we had unfilled vacancies and have a backlog of vacancies for positions we're just now trying to get recruited. So we experienced a salary savings of about $2.3 million. We did have overtime. We had increase in overtime of about $700,000. We had personal protective equipment and other expenses of about $1 million. We had about $400,000 of housing and human services costs. We are expecting another stimulus check or federal grant money, the American Recovery Act. We were originally slated to get $10.8 million in those in grant funds. I just learned today that they've revised our estimate downward to 9.7. So we've got about 1.1 million that we're going to need to make adjustments in the budget for, because this was predicated on getting the whole 10.8 over this fiscal year and next. We also are spending about $500,000 on COVID facility improvements. This has to do primarily with HVAC systems and properly filtering the air to cut down on circulating dirty air. We have about $200,000 spent on conditional use permitting. This is where we changed parking into outside business activities and changing them back. We have EOC staffing, and the result over the course of the entire pandemic is about an $18.5 million hit to our finances. So I get asked that all the time. It's a significant number, and I just wanted to share our thoughts about it with everybody. Mayor, I see you've unmuted.
Yeah, if you could real quick say, how are we accounting for that 18, or now it's 18.5 million? How do you think about where that money went?
Well, that is basically foregone opportunity. So for us, at this point in time, we had thought we would have an ending fund balance at the end of this period of about 4.5 million. As you'll see later in the presentation, it'll only be about 500,000. So about 4 million of that is a reduction in our fund balance. Of course, it would have been nice to have additional staff to make it through. This was a different kind of recession. Usually in a recession, the demand for services from the city sort of lightens up a little bit. This particular recession, the demand for services from the city actually increased. And we, would have been nice to have staff to do that. But the significant pieces of this are our inability to continue to add to the infrastructure replacement reserve that we've been putting about $2 million a year into. So that's about $6 million that will not be added to that reserve over the period of this budget cycle. And we were also planning on making some pretty significant investments into stormwater projects, roughly $5 million worth of projects that'll have to be postponed or funded with other revenue sources. And then there's about another $1 million worth of smaller items that just will not be done as a result of this. So if you sort of lump all that together, that's our 18.5 million of foregone opportunity.
So thank you.
Okay. All right. So let me get to the next slide. So sales and use tax, just to give you an idea, can everyone see my pointer on the screen?
Yes.
Okay, great. So here's the Great Recession. And if you take a look, if we had continued along the progression here, it took a good 6 to 7 years to recover. Our current outlook is we're going to have this sharp decline, and that's pretty painful, but it's going to be a sharp rise out of the recession. We're looking at this, and with businesses opening, the different economic forecasts, and sort of the activity we see out in the economy, we're expecting a pretty fast recovery, and your budget is actually predicated on that occurring. And all the indicators out there are that it will be a quick recovery. With transient occupancy tax, again, you'll see this was the Great Recession, and this particular event was devastating the transient occupancy tax. Again, it's going to take us about 5 or 6 years to fully recover, but the recovery appears pretty quick here. Part of that has to do with the fact that the economy is reopening, but we also added more hotels to our portfolio that were brought online about the time the pandemic began. So we're pretty confident that these two revenue sources, the two big revenue sources impacted by the pandemic, are going to rebound pretty nicely as the economy starts to reopen. So, as Mark mentioned, the council recently adopted new goals and priorities. So obviously, on stated goal and priorities, continue to navigate through COVID-19. But the 5 items were asset management and stormwater, homelessness, affordable housing, downtown implementation, the comprehensive general plan update, and modernization, training, and workplace enhancements. This budget contains resources sufficient enough to implement the work plan that was presented to council and accepted at our last workshop. So the budget you're going to see tonight will push all of these goals forward in significant ways. All right. So in these presentations, I usually like to focus on the general fund. And one of the reasons for that, this slide helps illustrate, is this is citywide income by fund. And you'll see the general fund is the large blue line on the left side of each fiscal year, and is obviously the largest single operating fund of the city. It is where all of our discretionary spending happens, and that's one of the reasons we focus on it. The other thing that this chart should call your attention to is, after the general fund, the most important fiscal items happening relate to our enterprise funds. So our wastewater, our water distribution, our airport, and stormwater are in a group, the next significant block of operations that are fiscally impactful to the city. You'll notice in 2019-20 actual, we have this anomaly in debt service. That is because we refunded the city's variable rate debt in 2019-20. About this time last year, we went from variable to fixed. We achieved a fixed interest rate of slightly more than 2%. Pretty excited about that, as we're expecting interest rates to rise over this fiscal period and through the end of the debt, saving us a significant amount of money. But that anomaly will appear in trend data throughout this presentation. All right. So uses by category, this is citywide. You'll see that we've got personnel and supplemental personnel. Those two items added together are the cost of your people. Now, Livermore is primarily a service organization, and that's specifically true about the general fund, but our enterprise funds, which are included in this data, actually a significant cost there. And one of the reasons why supplies and services look so big proportionately is that we include in there the cost of water that we resell from Zone 7. So that's an interesting change. And the other thing that's included in here is the way we account for the fire department changed several years ago when we adopted a new JPA agreement. And now the cost of the fire department, instead of being broken up into traditional categories, the entire cost, about $18 million a year, shows up in supplies and services. And you'll notice again in 1920, this significantly different number compared to the other years, $40 million higher. That is the refunding of that debt service. So it shows up here because we actually had to disperse $40 million to satisfy the variable rate debt. Right? You'll see a little bit of capital outlay. We have transfers out. Again, the 90 million is an anomaly related to the debt. Those are internal transfers between city funds to gather the resources and actually spend them out for the debt refinancing. The 20 some odd million you see in the other years is more traditional. The 1920 number is skewed by the refinancing of the debt. And then you see capital improvement as a portion of our spending. So that is the components citywide of our expenditure structure. So I cannot see the raise hand feature. So if anybody has questions, if you would audibilize, that would be terrific. All right. So the general fund budget for 2021, the existing budget is the first column. We thought we would actually run a deficit of about 17 million. The budget that we're proposing tonight shows we should only have a deficit of about 3 million. So you'll notice the most significant change is operating revenue. And we have an increase of close to 9 million. So that is primarily the 5.4 million of ARPA, or federal grant money, we're expecting in this fiscal year. The 10.8 I showed on the first slide is split into 2 fiscal years. So we're supposed to get half of it in 2021. So that accounts for about 5.4 million of that almost $9 million increase. We also received several other pieces of one-time money, grants from the county for Goodness Village. I think it's close to $2 million worth of grant money that shows up here. If you take those two items together, they account for the lion's share of the increased operating revenue, right? So if you look down, apologize, you'll see that operating expenditures are actually gone down a bit. That is being driven by the vacancies that I discussed in the earlier slide. Our biggest savings category is in personnel costs. So,
Hey Doug, it's Brittany. I have a question real fast.
okay, go ahead.
So this FY 2021 proposed, it's now going to be like 9 instead of 10 million from the Fed. So that would change our excess by about $1.5 million. Am I thinking correctly about that?
That is correct.
Okay, just checking to make sure I can understand.
Yeah, and that'll be spread across 2 years. So it'll impact us several $100,000 in each year, right?
Right.
So we'll make some adjustments in the final budget to reflect that. So the capital improvement plan, of course, we decided to slow down a little bit to see what would be the ultimate outcome with COVID, and to take a little bit more cautious approach, and so sort of scale back our plans to build and repair infrastructure. So those are the major changes to our cost structure for this year. Obviously, trying to reduce our outflow in a responsible way. So this is our proposed budget for the next 3 years. So obviously, the first column is the one I just showed you. And then we have the 2 fiscal years further out. So you'll see that we're expecting the economy to continue to recover. Our operating revenues are growing at what is a more normal pace, a little bit more conservative than pre-COVID. But we're definitely expecting the economy to recover pretty quickly. And you'll notice that we have a large transfer in 21, 22, and that has to do with a reimbursement from FEMA for some flood damage that occurred several years ago that we'd spent to repair out of the general fund. So that's why you see a spike in the middle year for transfers in. Right? And you'll see on our operating expenditures, those are ramping up, and that's because they assume a higher staffing level, and we've incorporated council goals and priorities. And specifically, since this is the general fund, there's a good amount of money programmed for a general plan update and for some updates to our operating systems and softwares. So that's the increase you're seeing there. Transfers out are growing. We're expecting to have to issue some debt about this time next year to build the L Street garage. So what you'll see is an increase in transfers out from the general fund to reflect about a couple months worth of debt service towards the end of next year. And then the 9 million is sort of our debt burden from that point forward until about 2030, when our existing COP, the one we just fixed from variable rate, will be repaid. So we're going to be having debt service out of the general fund about $9 million a year until 2030. So you'll notice that we have a significant investment in this fiscal year. We're trying to get the I Street garage improvements done. And so that's the lion's share of that 13 million. There's some other items in there, a Home Street wall and a couple other projects. And then in fiscal year 22-23, you're seeing the general fund take a little bit of breather from investment in capital improvements, right? The next line shows the increase in contribution to reserves. So obviously, as our operating expenses and transfers out go up, our reserve policy calls for the appropriate 30% reserve. And so some resources are going to be shifted to reserved status from available. So it's important to understand that that's about $4.5 million that currently sits in available fund balance that ends up being reserved because of the increased cost structure. All right. Any questions?
I have a number of questions, but if you'd prefer, I can leave them till you are finished. They don't need to be answered now. That Mr. Mayor and Mr. Alessio?
So what I'll do is I can see the raised hand feature. So if people want to ask questions, raise your hand, then I'll recognize you.
Thank you. That would be great.
Okay, well, I'll ask one now while we're on this chart, if that's okay. So can you just tell me how much, when we take on the debt service for L Street in a year, once it becomes stabilized, which looks like 2022, how much of that 9 million, actually my question is, how much debt service do we pay on the debt we'll be taking on for L Street just by itself per year?
Sure. It's going to be close to $4.5 million a year.
Okay, so about $5 million a year of debt service for the garage, starting FY21, but kind of plateauing and for the duration of the loan.
Correct. It'll only be for a partial year in 21, 22, as we plan on issuing the debt in spring.
That's what.
So there will only be about a quarter year of principal and interest.
Got it. Thank you.
What's the term of that debt? It sounds like it's getting paid off pretty quick.
So that debt is going to be a 30-year note. So that's usually what happens. Well,
but 30 years at $4.5 million a year, that's a lot of money. That's got to be more than just the garage.
It's our estimate of what it'll cost. So,
wow.
Yeah. So typically for every $1 million you borrow, for every 10 million, there's about a million a year in repayment. And so, for every, so we're estimating to need proceeds of about 45 million. So we're assuming, 4.5 million of debt service a year. All right. So this is general fund sources by category. So this is just to give you an idea. These are our main categories of revenue in the general fund. And I think one of the most important things that this chart illustrates is before COVID, property tax and sales tax were neck and neck. They were about equal. So, and property tax hasn't grown significantly. So this sort of illustrates, the impacts of COVID on our income. So if anyone wants to know what shows up in any of these other categories, would be happy to discuss it. But I think the main point here is to see that sales tax and property tax used to be very equally proportioned. And, unfortunately, it'll take a number of years for that to sort of happen again. Right. So the general fund operating expenditures, and this is by department. So you'll see, obviously, we spend about half of our budget on public safety, being the police and the fire department. The police is obviously the large blue line, and the fire department is the second large red line. And every other department shows up in there proportionately. All right. And then general fund reserves. So general fund reserves are basically the accumulation of wealth when income is more than your expenses, right? That leads to equity or fund balance, which is what we talk about with the reserve. So this is, resources that have been built up over a long period of time. So for us, those are in several different categories. This first layer is what we call non-spendable. This is equity that's related to assets that aren't liquid. So an asset that's not liquid is receivable. So the general fund has loaned out money to other funds to the tune of $5 or $6 million. Although that shows up in the general fund's net worth, it's sort of hard to spend because it hasn't been repaid yet. So that's the portion of the general fund balance that is non-spendable. And it's made up primarily of a note receivable from other funds and then some minor prepaid expenses, prepaid insurance and prepaid software licensing. All right. The next layer of fund balance is called committed. And this is one of the categories of fund balance covered by the council policy that we set aside 30% of our operating and debt service reserves each year, committed being the portion of this that's hardest to access, that's meant to offset any significant permanent degradation of our income base. Think of an earthquake damaging property values, or your ability to earn sales tax over a long period of time, or a wildfire that burns portions of the town, okay? The next component is assigned, and that's equal to about 13.5% of your operating expenses and debt service. The concept behind the assigned fund balance is this is intended to help mitigate against economic downturn. So during the Great Recession, we burned through $12 million of fund balance in 4 years. And so we think it's really important to make sure you have a savings account with a significant amount of money built up in it so that you can make it through economic downturns without impacting service levels in the community, to help sort of stabilize for economic uncertainty. All right. And then we have the unassigned 1.5% reserve that is also dictated by council policy. So those are your 30%. Then after that, in 2015-16, council directed me to put aside, when possible, $2 million a year to infrastructure repair and replacement. And luckily, each year we've been able to put in an additional $2 million there. Unfortunately, during the remainder of this budget cycle, we're not anticipating income sufficient enough to add to that reserve. Okay, so right now we've got it about $10 million in there, and your financial plan shows it staying at $10 million. What you'll notice when I bring the budget back for adoption in June, I'm going to ask not only that you adopt the budget, but you extend permission to me that in the event that revenues come in higher than projected, or our operating expenses are less than budgeted, that I be given the ability to add $2 million to this reserve if we finish the year better than anticipated. So if that happens, we won't know at the time the budget's adopted. We'll figure it out while we're closing the year. But if I have your permission, when we adopt the budget, I'll make sure that we categorize that as reserve for infrastructure if money is available. All right. So the next piece is our excess unassigned. And so this is the fund balance that we've saved up over time in anticipation of building out the downtown plan. And so you'll see that we've been saving this since before 2013-14 in anticipation of the projects that are on the plate during this cycle. And you'll see we plan on using a good deal of that during this period in It's primarily in the downtown. So the next slide is just a
Oh, a
table.
second, Doug, just a second. Councilmember Kick has a question.
Yeah, just real quickly, I just want to understand where the 2 million we gave to small business support, did that come from the unassigned reserve of the general fund? What portion of our budget did that come from? So people can kind of understand if there is an emergency, where do we take that from generally? And where did we take it from this last time?
Sure. So, so the reserves is an accumulation of resources over time. So that $2 million we spent helping the local businesses, it gets charged as an expense. Okay, so it doesn't come specifically from any of these reserves. What it means is that when this year ends, there won't be $2 million remaining. That would have been if we hadn't done that, right? So one of the reasons that there was confidence in our ability to do that is we have significant reserve balances, and so we knew that if things didn't turn out that way, we would still be in the position of financial prudence, and so it doesn't come directly from the balance sheet. Anytime a city takes money in or spends it, it goes through your income statement and ends up on your balance sheet. So it didn't come specifically from one of these categories. Okay.
Okay.
That help?
Yes, but if we didn't have any policies like this, we likely wouldn't have had 2 million to give out in the first place.
Correct. That, yes. So had we not been preparing for an economic downturn and had quite a bit of money built up, we wouldn't have had the luxury of doing that. A lot of communities in California had no ability to help out their businesses in that way. They're busy just trying to make sure that they can keep the doors open and provide minimal services. But we were keenly positioned in such a way over a number of years that allowed us to be able to do that.
Thank you for that clarification.
Right. So this table is basically just the numeric expression of the chart. In case the chart was hard to determine exact dollar amounts, and people like numbers and dollar amounts, or at least I do. So I thought I would show it in chart format. But this is exactly what we've been talking about the whole time. You'll see the excess unassigned balance, which grew to over 21 million, will be about $500,000 by the end of this budget cycle. Some of that, of course, is reflective of higher reserves, right, up here based on our spending pattern. And some of it goes out the door to build the projects that we're talking about. So about 4 million of it went to increased reserve amounts, and about 16 million is going to projects. Like I said, primarily in the downtown, but there are a couple other general fund funded projects that Mr. Vin will talk to you about later.
Councilmember Kick, do you still have your hand up? You got another question?
Nope, sorry about that.
Oh, okay.
So each year, the city does an iteration of the California Municipal Financial Health Diagnostic developed by the League of California Cities. So I think, gosh, it's been about 6 years ago that we started doing this. And basically the League of California Cities has a program that you put your budget into, and it gives you a rating of green, yellow, or red. And this is pretty consistent with last year's ranking. And it's better than some previous years. There have been times in the past 6 years where some of these items were red, and we had a few red and a couple more yellows. But this is almost unchanged from last year. And what this is showing you is that we're in pretty good, we're pretty healthy financially, but there are some items to be cautious about. Our fixed costs and our labor costs are what the league would consider in a cautious area. Our net operating deficit surplus, we're building things with fund balance, and a lot of cities never get to that point. So it sort of triggers a caution note from the league. We, of course, did it purposefully and built that money up. So it's not sort of accidental, but it is, worth being aware we can't keep up that level of activity for long. And those things, item number 6, they can strain your budgetary discretion. As all of you are aware, we don't have a lot of budgetary discretion, a lot less than you would think, to do projects outside of sort of the program. So
we have a couple of hands up at this point. Vice Mayor Monroe.
Yeah, I'm just curious. You say it's unchanged from last year. My recollection is that that's right. It looks like things have moved around just slightly, but I don't have last year's in front of me. So, but what I'm wondering is, given the pandemic, this strikes me as being not just similar to last year, but given that much better, sort of, given the context, would that be a fair statement, or is this taking that into account? Still similar. In other words, what was the effect of the pandemic on these ratings?
Sure. So you could see, since ours is unchanged, it didn't affect ours. But as you rightfully point out, the pandemic, if other cities are doing this each year, depending on your city, you would probably see more reds and yellows have occurred because of the pandemic. So your point, I think, is, hey, the fact that we stayed pretty constant and there was this big recession and pandemic, that's pretty good. So I appreciate that.
Okay. Councilmember Bonanno.
Yeah, Doug, can you just clarify number 7, what that means? The use of temporary funds is what I want to clarify specifically.
Sure. So temporary or one-time funds are not something you should count on for continuous operations. So we show up as a yellow here because we have a balanced budget, but part of that is that we have funds that are not recurring. So Goodness Village, you're getting some grant money that isn't going to occur every year, but we also had the budget expense. We're getting one-time grant funding from the federal government that's helping us balance the budget. So it's items like that. Okay. That's intended to note. So at the risk of making you dizzy, let me go up real quick to a previous slide. I apologize. Let me show you here. Okay. So one of the things that you would want to look for is, how does our operating revenue compare to our operating expenditures, right? So you can see here that our operating revenue is less than our operating expenditures. That's good. We're getting closer next year, especially with the debt service. So a quick, easy way to look at this is your operating revenue and operating expenditures ought to have a gap. If they don't, you're not going to be able to sustain that for very long. Okay.
That you're living off the transfers in, or you're accomplishing things with the transfers in.
Correct.
Okay. Thank you.
Mm-hmm. All right. So our long-term financial plan. So every time that we develop a budget, we also project beyond the budget cycle. And so we always are trying to look out into the future to see how the city is going to be doing beyond, just 2023, right? So this time around, I wanted to tell a little bit longer of a story with this data. So I had us go back a bit into the past. This right here is the Great Recession, where our expenses or our income dipped. It took a while for us to figure that out and get our expenses under control. And this time period is that $12 million I talked about before that we burned through in the last recession. You'll see that things have been pretty good ever since. We have every now and then our uses will be above our sources, and typically that's in regards to some capital project we're doing. And so that's why you see this gigantic spike here with our uses in this particular period being higher than our sources. Those are one-time project expenses. And after that works its way through our system, our structural expenses are going to align pretty well with our projected revenues and will for a number of years. And there will become a fairly good separation where sources start to outpace usage in 2030. We pay off that refinanced debt. CalPERS should stop increasing and start decreasing. A couple other significant pieces of the city's financial structure sort of take a turn in the early 2030s. So that would be a good time for the city, once we get there. But this is a little bit longer look than I give going backwards, just so it puts stuff into context.
Okay, Councilmember Bonanno.
Yeah, this is a great chart. I just have a suggestion, Doug, because I think this is kind of chart, if it was annotated a little bit, would be useful for the public beyond just us when we do these meetings. Like the delta in 2021-22, that I assume we're covering with the excess funds that have been accumulated in the excess, or whatever the combination of things. It would be good to show that, because the gaps are what draw people's attention, and to sort of say, wow, we didn't bankrupt the city because our uses were higher than our sources. It's just a little annotation on this, I think, could be very helpful for us to use outside of just these council meetings. Just a suggestion.
Agreed. And this slide does get used quite frequently in other settings. And so with a few notations on there, I think it would make it even more useful. So I certainly can add those annotations in there and make the slide available as we do, and it gets used, in the State of the City and in other presentations that occur.
And you said what you wanted to put in the annotation anyway, so just put your words into those areas and you're good.
All right, sounds like a plan. All right, so long-term concerns to be monitored. I always give you a list of things to, keep in mind on the horizon. For us, our biggest concern financially for the city and the general fund is stormwater and stormwater mandates. Okay, properly funding stormwater and the various mandates that come out of the regional board can be quite expensive, and there's no dedicated revenue source to match with that, and that's a real concern financially for the city. Item number 2 is infrastructure or asset management. It's making sure we take care of the physical infrastructure of the city on a regular going basis. You guys have made this a council goal and priority. We call it asset management, but that is, again, one of our big financial concerns into the future. And the last is pension costs. So at the current moment, we have pension costs pretty well in hand, but it does bear monitoring. Sometimes CalPERS can start fidgeting with their different assumptions, and it ends up increasing our required contributions and creates a lack of flexibility to do other things. And that is worth paying attention to, as I think they're actively considering making some adjustments now. All right. So with that, I just want to let you know the next steps. Are you going to receive the capital improvement program presentation from the city engineer, Bob Vinn? We would take any direction we receive tonight and we'll incorporate it into the final budget document, which will be before you on a consent item on June 14th. So with that, I'll stop sharing my screen, answer any final questions, and turn over the reins to Mr. Vinn.
Any questions or comments at this point? I think if we wrap this piece up so that we don't have to return it after the engineer presentation. So I see Councilmember Bonanno.
Yeah, a couple quick questions, and thank you so much for that presentation, Doug. You do a very nice job kind of walking us through all this, and also great job to you and your team on the debt refinancing. I think the problems we would have would be even harder to absorb were we not in the position to have refinanced that. One comment also about asset management and stormwater in particular, you know, our ability to maintain those systems, obviously after this presentation, is really predicated on finding additional sources of funding. I mean, we are not going to be able to take care of that based on what we generate on our own. So that was one of the reasons we prioritized this. It would allow our staff to spend some more effort trying to secure additional sources of funding for that. I continue to see that, as you do, as a pretty big risk. So I have three hopefully quick questions. You answered many of the other ones I had already. So the COVID facility improvements that you mentioned, do we feel like we've completed that? I mean, it's hard to believe $500,000 or the relatively small amount you showed would be adequate to make any changes we'd need to our facilities citywide. Can you just comment on that?
So Mr. Vind could probably speak a little bit better to that topic. That has to do primarily with air filtration. And so that is costs that are programmed into this budget cycle. I don't believe it covers all the city facilities. I believe that's getting started at the City Hall campus. So we have some other facilities that we'd like to upgrade, the filtration on their HVAC systems too. But I think that falls outside of this budget cycle. So
there's no outstanding liability that we're going to have to incorporate. I mean, that's either been incorporated or we're not planning it in the next 2 years.
Yes.
Okay. That's fine, unless Mr. Vin has something to add to that. That's fine. I was just curious about how extensive any additional work we might have to do. So sales tax. So I understand the recovery that you've programmed in to the next couple of years, but I think there's with COVID and people's maybe reluctance, and they're becoming more comfortable with shopping online. Do we feel like we have a future vulnerability that you haven't taken into account? I mean, if we used to get something like 30% of our revenue from sales tax, do we see a future decline in that we're going to have to address, or you must be feeling fairly sanguine about sales tax being able to fund the same percentage that it typically has after we rebound?
Yeah, so this sales tax environment is interesting. Obviously, folks have been shopping more online. Currently, the way that works is online sales go into something called the county pool. Right. And then it is distributed based on the city's proportionate share of point of sale revenue. So we actually do really well in the county pool because of the outlet malls, right? I think we're one of the actually highest sales tax producers in the county. If somebody knows, I think we're third or fourth. So we actually get a pretty significant share of the county pool. It's close to 10%. You see Mark unmuted. So Mark, do you know, are we fourth, I think, in the county?
We are fourth, so we do very well per capita. And you're actually asking two questions, which is right now, in the coming couple of years, are we pretty certain about this? And the answer is yes. Over the longer term, there is risk in this area because of the assignment of sales desks for large providers of online services such as Amazon, where essentially all of both their in-state and out-of-state sales went into the county pool. Now, in some cases, a portion of those dollars go to point of sale to a warehouse. There are half a dozen of those in the entire state of California where those dollars are being concentrated. And as a part of your overall platform, we are lobbying to have those sales tax dollars returned back to the communities where they're generated from. So, over time, obviously, one of the things the state wants to do is encourage us to build housing. Well, one way to help us do that would be an incentive, a population-based incentive or other incentive based on essentially where the actual transaction happens rather than where the sales tax happens to be. So we're monitoring both the short run, which we're very comfortable with, and the longer run, which poses more risks. because of course the legislature's in session. So that's always a risky time for us.
Right, that really was my question, is that do we get our fair share based on where the resident is who places the online order? And you say, for now, we are getting our share, but that is at some risk if some of these other things come to pass.
That's
That's-
starting to shift, so we are concerned about that.
We care a lot about our retailers, that we actually are brick and mortar retailers, but in terms of the city's revenue due to sales tax, if people, Livermore residents buy it, we get the sales tax that we're entitled to.
And the answer is mostly. It used to be completely, and now that's shifted a little bit. And your staff is concerned about that trend line heading in the wrong direction.
Okay, got it. And I guess the last thing I wanted to say, maybe more of a comment, is you mentioned that the FY17 storm damage reimbursement from FEMA came to us in 2021. Is that correct? So we basically, we may get reimbursed for money that we spend, but it doesn't necessarily come in a timely fashion. So waiting 4 years or 4.5 years to get reimbursed for money that we had to outlay is, it's one thing to say we're going to get money reimbursed for things, but when it comes is also a factor. So that was all I had. Thank you again very much for the presentation.
Vice Mayor Monroe.
Yes, and I will also say thank you very much for the presentation. I really just had some comments. Once again, I think we need to think about where we spend our money is where our values are. And I think that we can look at where we are planning on spending our money and feel pretty good about that. When I look at the concerns in terms of taking care of our house, this is the house we live in, I think we're concerned about the right things in general. I wanted to make a comment that I'll probably make again, and I've made before, which is around the L Street garage. I voted for it. I think it's a project that's necessary, but I think it's really important to keep in mind that it's costing us, what is it, 45 million? I can't even remember because cost keeps changing, but it's 40 some odd million dollars. $4.5 million a year will be going to service that debt. I will remind us that the homeless are the budget for taking care of our homeless population was, with the help of the county, about $1 million. And so I'm just wanting to make sure we keep in mind, it's not that we shouldn't be doing this, it's not that we've made bad decisions, but I just want to make sure we keep in mind where we are putting our money. So that's it.
Okay, Councilmember Kick.
Just thank you for this. And what I realized looking at this is that this budget is reflective of values from past councils and plans made from past councils, and we need to finish what we started. And so, as I've discussed the importance of the general plan, I think it'll be interesting to see as our community changes and the general plan maybe changes, how budgets might change, because if we build more housing, we get more property tax. If we, build, if we have more hotels, we'll get more transit occupancy tax. So I knew nothing about this coming in, and I really appreciate you, Doug. You've been super, super helpful in making this easy for me to understand. And I appreciate the opportunity to change how our budget looks by changing what our goals and priorities are, not by picking apart this budget, because we do spend it on people. And I would like to point out that a lot of people were laid off in other cities, and I really appreciate that we didn't have to do that in Livermore. And that, I think, says a lot about our values, is that we kept our people here.
Okay. Are we ready to move on to the next piece? I think so.
Yes, we are. And with that, I'll introduce Bob Vinn, our city engineer, to lead us through our capital improvement program budget. Bob, you are muted.
Good evening, Mayor Werner, members of the council. I am Bob Vinn, your city engineer, and I'll be presenting the 2021 to 2023 capital improvement plan. Tonight's presentation is broken into two pieces. The first half will be a recap of the 1921 capital improvement plan, show you what we accomplished. And then the second half will be the proposed 21-23 capital improvement plan. But first, what is a capital improvement? I mean, why is it different from the operating budget? So it's basically new public infrastructure that serves buildings and transportation purposes. It also includes new city buildings and facilities. It includes both new projects and reconstruction and rehabilitation projects. And it also includes property acquisition that may not be necessarily associated with a public infrastructure, such as open space. And what is the capital improvement plan? Well, simply it's a budget book for capital improvements. It includes funding for all the aspects of developing a capital improvement project, including staff time, consultants, contractors, planning, design, and construction. So in the plan, we do it with the budget cycle, and just like the budget, the operating budget, we update the current fiscal year to match actual expenditures. And then we propose a new 2-year budget with funding for each project within the plan. So now I'm going to recap what was in the 2019-2021 CIP. We completed a number of projects in the last couple years, and I'll be going through them by kind of program area. So the first is the airport. We demolished the old airport admin building. You can see before and kind of during the demolition in the picture on the right. We also painted some hangars, did some grooving of the runway. In the downtown, we completed Veterans Way, which is the picture at the upper right. You can see parking and pedestrian path. We completed Stockman's Park, and we're almost complete with phase 2 of a 2-phase downtown street lighting enhancement project. In Parks and Beautification program, we completed phase 1 and 2 of the Home Street Wall. We're just about ready to accept those projects. We completed a sound wall reconstruction up in Springtown, and we have reimbursed LARPD for their eligible park projects out of our developer fee. For public buildings, we finished recoding the City Hall and Police Building. In the category of public safety, we completed a evidence storage freezer for the police building. We're installing community street cameras, and we're nearly done with that program. And we completed the police facility expansion study, which outlines some future needs for the police building. In the area of storm drain, we completed phase 1 of the storm drain trash capture program. You can see this picture on the left, these big nets. We work annual stream maintenance program to help clear outfalls and keep low flow channels flowing and culverts clear of silt and sediment. And we also are still working on permanent storm damage repairs from the 2017 storms. We did quite a bit in street maintenance this cycle. We had a sidewalk repair program, and during the cycle, the council adopted policies to help with the asset management of our sidewalk program. We also completed a number of slurry seal and street resurfacing programs during the 2 years and finished a federally funded rehabilitation of North Livermore and South Livermore Avenues. In the traffic control category, we installed a number of new traffic signals. The picture at the bottom left shows the new signal at Greenville and Patterson Pass Road. That one was sorely needed. We also upgraded some equipment that help run the signal system, controllers, video detection, and equipment in the city's traffic operations center. And we do an annual signing and striping project to make sure that the lines are fresh on the road. In the trail and bike category, we completed the Iron Horse Trail Bridge over Murrieta Avenue and graded the trail all the way to Isabel. The paving on that trail will be completed by Zone 7 this summer as they finish up a creek channel maintenance project they're doing there. We also completed active transportation plan improvements, well, we're almost done, on First Street. And you can see here the protected bike lane approaching Mines Road. At the water reclamation plant, we did process improvements, rehabilitation. We modified the aeration tank to upgrade it, as you see in the bottom left, and we upgraded the emergency generator at the plant. In the water category, we completed the Dalton water tank, which you see in this picture. It's a very large structure. And we also had the Jack London recycled water line installation. So those projects were completed. We have a number of projects in the 1921 CIP that are currently under construction. You can see them in this list. So I'll highlight a few. The I Street Garage, Livermorium Plaza, the council just awarded that to a new contractor, and that's going to get going soon. The Granada Channel pipe repair. We had some flooding a few years ago when a culvert under the railroad tracks collapsed, so we'll be repairing that this summer. We also have a number of projects in the 1921 CIP that are currently under design. You see, I have them broken out by category, or by program area, excuse me. So a couple projects at the airport, a big emphasis downtown, where we'll be designing and constructing Veterans Park, and the Livermore Village parking garage will get going during this period. We also are designing Home Street Wall Phase 3, which is the last phase of that wall. For public buildings under design, we have the City Hall HVAC and chiller replacement. That's one of the projects Doug mentioned is funded by the general fund. It's through facilities fees, but it's basically backfilled with general funds. For the police, we're designing a real-time awareness center, and the street maintenance program. We have 2021 annual program under design, and a number of trail and bike projects, including the Las Colinas Trail, where we are working with a developer to build that as a condition of approval for their project. We have a project to do some trail maintenance, some overlays on segments in needing pavement repair. And we have a couple other improvements, the Arroyo Road Trail from Wetmore south towards Wente, as we're working with LARPD in the county, and we're doing environmental work on that. We also have an improvement at Jack London and Isabel to help with the bike movements at that intersection, as well as add another through lane in the westbound direction. Transportation projects, we're working on a project report and environmental work for the I-580 Vasco interchange, which would add a second bridge, modify the ramps, and improve bike and ped travel through that area. Where we have Vasco Road widening, the north end of Vasco Road. We have some stormwater projects, Cottonwood Creek and Culvert Outfalls is an annual repair. And some wastewater projects under design as well, primary and secondary improvements at the water reclamation plant. And the Springtown truck line sewer is being done also by the same developer doing the Trail T6. So we did have some reduction in expenditures over what we had assumed a year ago. And it's about $22 million less expenditures. And they were, the budget was impacted by COVID, which caused some concern about some of the general fund expenditures. So the I Street Garage was delayed. That's one of the pieces. We also had a delay to the Legacy project, doing the First Street flex zone improvements on both the north and south side. And then we had a delay to the Livermorium project due to an unresponsive contractor. And we had one large, the 2020 street resurfacing project that was also delayed due to coordination with Caltrans for an encroachment permit, because that particular project would repair the pavement on the Airway and the First Street overcrossings. So we expect those projects to move ahead this year. And that ends the recap of the prior CIP. Now I'm ready to move into the new CIP, unless anybody wants to pause for a question about what we've accomplished in the last 2 years.
I think we're good.
Okay. So the CIP projects really stem from council priorities, which you saw earlier, but you can see what kind of public infrastructure might support or does support your goals. So for example, the downtown, we have parking with the I Street and L Street Garage, and parks with Livermorium and Stockman's and Veterans. And so you can see all these different goals, how infrastructure plays into helping to meet those goals. So we put out a call for projects to all the departments in the city, and we had 219 projects submitted for consideration. We've put together a program for your consideration that includes 83 projects recommended for funding in the next 2 years, and that's at a level of $152.5 million. That's a big CIP program. So you can see from this chart, we're doing about 3/4 of the number of projects that were submitted, and about 80% of the budget that was submitted is what's being recommended.
Can I ask a real quick question on that slide, Clara?
Sure.
What's the difference between what was requested and, can you go back to that slide, please? Yeah, the 219 submitted, what's the difference between the 123 projects with funding requested in FY 21 to 23? The difference between 219 and 123 were projects for future funding?
Yes, so some of the projects we have in the CIP are taken out of the city's infrastructure master plans, like the sewer master plan or water master plan. And they have recommendations for improvements that are needed when the general plan is built out. And so not all those are needed right away. We list them, but they don't have any funding requested.
Okay, thanks.
So capital improvement projects are primarily developed by engineering staff. And this pie chart kind of shows what engineering staff do. We split our time between capital improvements. So it's almost 60% of our time. Operating activities such as traffic ops, our East Avenue study, administrative functions, our stormwater reporting, a whole bunch of different things go into operating. And that's a little less than 30%. And then development review is about 16%. The development is somewhat of an estimate. So this is based on historical uses, but if this activity increases, then something needs to give in one of these other areas. And similarly, if we're asked to maybe do additional capital improvements as maybe a project's added mid-year or something, then we need to look at one of these other areas or perhaps a different capital improvement, to swap out. Okay. So we've divided the proposed projects into 5 groups of projects, and I call them priority groups 1 through 5. And they're sort of related to how I went through them just a few minutes ago. We have priority group 1 are those projects that are under construction. We need to finish them, finish our contractual obligations, close the projects out, and move on to other things. We have downtown implementation, which is the council goal. We have those projects that have already been obligated by a grant or some other agreement that typically the council would approve, including like a development agreement. So like the Trail T6 falls into this category. And then we have that group of projects that are under design from the prior CIP. So those make up priority groups 1 through 4. The next group, group 5, these are new projects that are not currently in our program. And so we went through all the project submittals, and for the new projects, we assigned priority points and ranked them to help come up with our recommendations. So this is a snippet of a very large table that's included as attachment 3 to your staff report. And it's all similar tables also in the back of the capital improvement plan document. And in this, we have the projects. I've put the type. So most of these that are on the list, what we see here, if you can read it, I know it's kind of small, these are the new projects that were not part of the 1921 CIP. And you can see most of them are rehabilitation. We have a few operating projects and a few safety projects and 1 amenity. So of the recommended projects, 152 million and a half over 2 years, 42% is in the downtown area. And that makes up the biggest piece of the expenditures. And you can see the second biggest piece is in the wastewater area at 19%. I also split up the projects by that functional category. And you can see we have 47% are expansion, 33 are rehabilitation. So normally, particularly when we we're concerned about asset management, we would want to see this rehabilitation a bigger piece, and it usually is. The reason the expansion is so big this time is, of course, the 2 garages. So a little bit about funding. So Doug talked a lot about the general fund, which is the most flexible funding source for capital improvements. And you can see that takes up the biggest piece of the revenue that funds these capital improvements at 38%. It includes general fund, the debt service for the L Street garage that will be created in a year or so, and the facility rehab fee that I mentioned previously. The second biggest piece of the revenue are local and non-local user fees. These are our enterprise fees, people's water bill, sewer bill, the revenue we get from that. It's also gas tax, SB1 and Measure B, I believe, are in this category. And then we have development impact fees making up the third highest revenue. Those are your traffic impact fee and your sewer connection fee and so on. So some highlights of the proposed CIP program. I mentioned the biggest area is in downtown revitalization. You can see the projects here. The big one being the L Street garage. The second biggest category is in wastewater and water improvements. And the big project in this list is the primary and secondary treatment improvements at the water reclamation plant. And transportation makes up the third biggest category, which includes 3 of our program categories, actually 4 of them. Traffic control, you can see here, our street maintenance. We'll be doing almost 9 million in street maintenance. Bike and trails, and then we have a few roadway projects I mentioned, the interchange and Vasco Road and the Jacqueline and Isabel intersection. For public buildings, we have, and the airport, we have improvements to the runways, the taxiways out at the airport that are stemmed from a geometry study that was completed in 2019. We have a chiller plant replacement at the Civic Center for the HVAC, and the multi-service center improvements that you just awarded a few meetings ago. Flood control and public safety. Mentioned the real-time awareness center under design and the Granada channel repair. We also have some stream maintenance projects here, Collier Canyon Culvert. Parks and beautification. We are proposing, the phase 3 of the Home Street Wall. We also have park facilities fees, which go to LARPD, and a project for citywide sculptures. A little bit about asset management. So we have, I think it's over $3.5 billion in assets. So what's shown here is our non-enterprise fund assets at $2.46 billion. And our enterprise assets at $1.3 billion. So we do want to protect our assets and keep them maintained and in a state of good repair to the greatest extent possible. And this table shows how we're doing in this particular proposed CIP on doing that. So if I'm going to start at the bottom, we have our enterprise funds down here. And what this shows is an average annual need. So when you do rehabilitation projects, they usually come in big chunks. And then you'll spend a bunch of money on a facility, and then you won't spend any for a number of years. So this is you take the life cycle of the facility and how much it costs for replacement, and you divide by the number of years, and that basically is your average annual need. So if we spend this on average every year, we'll be doing good. As you can see, in enterprise funds, we're spending more than our average need because, as I mentioned, you kind of have to do discrete projects. So we're doing that big primary, secondary project at the treatment plant. In the non-enterprise funds, we're not doing quite as well. As you can see, we have an average annual need of about $40 million, and we're proposing about a little under 16 million over the 2 years for rehabilitation projects. And that concludes my presentation, and I open it up for any questions. Thank you.
Councilmember Kick.
Hi, I have a question about the Las Positas Road to Redwood and Springtown. Can you explain a little bit about that? In our packet, it says that it's going to be T6 segment E1, but like in the drawing, I don't see any E's anywhere, so I'm having a hard time seeing where T6 connects to E1. Can you explain where is this going? What is the purpose of this trail? Who is it going to connect?
Sure. So Trail T6 has actually been a high priority trail for both the city and LARPD for quite a while. It would extend from Springtown at the end of Redwood Road through what we call the Catholic High School property, and connect, well, with the continuation of Trail T6 along Las Colinas and Las Positas Road behind the auto dealers and Walmart and Home Depot.
So it would, there's like a break. So T6, there's a break. Is that just connecting those two? Because T6 goes, I guess, the direction, you can't see my screen, so I don't know why I'm pointing at it.
So what the piece of T6 that's proposed in this capital improvement plan is from Redwood Road to Las Colinas. And there's also a spur trail that would go from Lassen Road through the Lassen development and then westerly until it connects up to T6.
Okay, thank you. I'm just, there's no E on here, so I was a little bit confused. Thanks for clarifying that. And then I had another question about I have the number down, but I don't remember what it's called. It's 202206. It's about pedestrian crossings. And it says it'll be a variety of places. Are those places already identified? The reason I'm asking is that there are some schools that are applying for the Safe Schools grants. And I want to make sure that I know those grants require matching funds from the city. Is this the section that those matching funds would come from, or would we be able to find money for those matching grants? I don't want grant money to go unspent for safer schools crossings.
Absolutely. So we have a project that's currently shown as a contingency project, but it is funded, and it's 2022-06 crosswalk safety improvements, and it's proposed for $150,000. And that one is the local match for the grant should we get awarded the Safe Route to School mini grant we applied for.
Okay, and so if another school applies for one anytime in this 21-23 capital improvement plan, would that be something that we could potentially find funds for, or is that 150 potentially supposed to cover all of those? I don't really know what the cost of that Safe Schools would be.
So this project is more than just that one Safe Route to School grant. We do have crossing improvements proposed and identified in the active transportation plan. So this is really an annual project where we try to knock off, the highest priorities of that program.
Thank you.
Vice Mayor Monroe.
Yeah, thank you very much. That was really quite a presentation. I'm very appreciative of the amount of work that's taken place over the past years. You forget, one of the nice things about these presentations is the ability to go back and take stock. And you've done a really nice job of presenting that. The council did receive a comment that I thought was worth addressing, or three questions. One has to do with the CIP 201615, the airport water quality basins, wondering about the Kaiser air hangers, but they haven't submitted a project. So golly, that's surprising. Can we clarify why that would be in the budget before that? So that was one question. A third one was understanding the airfield geometry study. And then switching topics completely, there was a question about the East Avenue corridors project, wondering why $500,000 has been budgeted and $1 million for the coming in the future, when no decision's been made about what to do with the lanes. And then also, could we move the test until when school's in session? So that's, again, I am simply channeling the question received, but I thought they were questions that were worth getting an answer to. So
Sure. So the airport hydro modification basin, which is a water quality and water treatment facility that is implemented due to the regulations from the board. So we need to clean the water before they get in the creek, and we need to make sure the rate of the runoff of that water doesn't cause erosion. So that's what the project is. This one would, we have two HMP basins programmed for the airport, and the one on the south side would be needed if any new south side hangar were constructed. I am aware that the Kaiser Air has been in discussions with the city about potentially submitting an application, and so it's whatever, and it doesn't have to be Kaiser Air. It's whatever company wants to build a Southside hangar would be on the hook for building the HMP basin, and this is programmed in the CIP as a reimbursement because it's really serves more than just their individual project.
So if no application were received from Kaiser or any other, this would still go forward because it's useful in general, or this would not go forward unless an application from someone were received? In other words,
This likely would not go forward. The idea here is to have the developer build a regional basin on the airport that benefits more than just themselves, and the city would reimburse them a portion of the cost.
All right.
All right.
That was one.
Yep.
Moving on.
Number two, the airfield geometry study improvements. I touched on that in the presentation. So
right.
Those are taxiway improvements for safety purposes at the airport that are recommended in a study that was completed in 2019. It was all done with FAA oversight, and they identified. They basically went back and looked at what they called incidents, which doesn't necessarily mean an accident, but it sounds like maybe somebody did something they weren't supposed to do, or they were in a place they weren't supposed to be at a certain time. And so they looked at the geometry of the airport to see if there was improvements that could be made to help address those, reduce the incidents, make it clearer to the pilots or the people on the ground where they're supposed to be waiting, taxing, and so on. So that's what that project is, and it's got an FAA grant, and we expect to complete design this year. Well, it doesn't have the FAA grant funded yet. We'll complete design, submit it to the FAA, and hopefully they'll give us the money and we can proceed with construction in 2 years.
Great.
And the last one you asked about was the East Avenue study. Yes, the study is still ongoing, and there will be a phase 2 of the study coming up sometime after school's in session. So we agree completely. It doesn't make sense to do any sort of demonstration if traffic's not, relatively normal. But the reason we program funding is it's a placeholder, really. We expect the council to direct staff to make some improvements out there. Whether we're reducing lanes or not, and that's still an open question, there are other improvements that we absolutely will recommend: crosswalk improvements, lighting improvements, maybe some bulb out improvements. I think we're part of the program. So, the bike lane and the traffic lanes are only a piece of the project.
Great. So in effect, you've given a very nice answer to each of the 3 questions, but the short answer to all 3 of those is, when you're planning a budget, you are planning for contingencies and for all possibilities, and that's what this budget shows. Would that be a fair summary?
That is. There are a number of budgets that are more placeholders. When we have new projects, we try to estimate the cost, but you get a much better estimate after you get through design. So we try to plan for contingencies for grants that we might get. Sometimes we put those in. This particular CIP, our plate is very full. As I mentioned, the 152 million, I think that's probably the biggest 2-year CIP this city's ever had. So I'm not anxious to take on a lot of, new stuff, but we do try to plan in case it comes up.
Great. Thank you.
Okay, Councilmember Carling, and what I would suggest here at this point, questions, and then we should go through a final wrap-up set of comments. So you want to, Councilmember Carling, ask your questions and then do your wrap-up. Does that work for you?
Perfect for me. So, right. My question is, you had on your list of Vasco 580 interchange at, I don't know, 4.4 million, something like that. That's a study, right? I mean, I don't want the public to think that that's going to be changes, or they'll see changes out there just yet.
It is a study. A project like that takes multiple years to complete. So I would expect to be asking for money to complete the environmental, or perhaps start the design in the next CIP, assuming this is approved and we complete our study.
Right, I know, and I think that a lot of folks have been concerned about Vasco 580, and I just wanted to be clear that this was the study to figure out what needs to be done. Now, just to wrap up, from my point of view, I think both Doug's presentation and Mr. Vinn's presentation were quite good. I was like the vice mayor. I'm always impressed by the amount of work that gets accomplished, and certainly looking forward to the kinds of projects that are going to be undertaken over the next budget cycle. So kudos to you, the staff, and all the folks that have been involved in this. So thanks again very much.
Hey, Councilmember Kick.
Yes, I actually have 2 more questions. I flipped over my notes page, I remembered. So on the Doolin Park project, I know that this is the second phase of the project. One of the things that I had discussed with Public Works at some point would be fixing that fence out there. Do you know if that's budgeted or projected in that project?
I don't know specifically. I'm going to see if Joel Waxdeck, who's the assistant city engineer, I think he might have spoken with maintenance about this particular project. Joel?
Hi, Thank you. This is Joel Waxtech, Assistant City Engineer. On the Doolin Park, I'm not sure, Bob, on that. It said this project completes the rehabilitation of Doolin Park at Junction Avenue Middle School by installing an irrigation system around the perimeter of the park and placing appropriate plant materials in a new park sign. That's the description on the project.
Right. It's not super specific. If possible, I would love if we could potentially look at, since we're going to be spending money there, and what a cost for a fence is. That fence is definitely not up to, whatever the current code standards for a tot lot are. And so if we're going to be doing work out there, I would appreciate if that could be, looked at. It might not fit in the budget, but just if you could take a look, that would be great. And then the last question I had, oh, dang it, where'd it go? I just lost it because I messed up my page. Las Positas widening. I understand that that's in like, we want to do this, but I'm wondering in the justification for the project, it talks about it being necessary because of the 2003 general plan traffic congestion. And considering we're redoing our general plan and we may have different projections based on the coming study, I'm just wondering if this is really the right time to start spending, because it's a lot of money that is going to be used to widen that road. And so I'm just wondering if now's the time, or should we wait until we do our study for the next general plan to see if there really is going to be such a traffic impact over there that we will need to widen that entire road. So I don't know the answer, just asking that question now.
So I'd mentioned this particular project, it would be done by a car dealer that's proposed to have a project on Las Positas there. So they would widen the road to our arterial standard, and they would pay for their own frontage improvements, curb, gutter, sidewalk, and the bike lane. But the road, what this project would do is reimburse the developer for the median piece, and also a little bit that would be off of their frontage to both the east and the west.
So I think I see something like 8 million in off years. That would be suggesting that we expand the entire road, or is that 8 million for just that small piece?
No, the 8 million is for other portions of Las Positas Road. So there's a piece on Las Positas near Bennett Drive where there's also another set of vacant parcels where we had a residential project. And so that 8 million is for both the piece near First Street and this piece by the car dealer.
Okay, so there is projected to be residential projects out there already. That's something that I didn't have clear in my head when I was looking at that.
Are there
So I guess to clarify would just be, so when if we're approving this, we're approving the short-term piece, or are we approving the full expansion? That's just, I guess, the biggest question.
You are approving funding allocation for 2 years, the 2021 through 2023, and you're also adjusting the current year budget. So anything beyond 2023, you would not be approving.
Okay, so just that little piece, basically. Okay,
Yes.
Thank you.
Councilmember Kick, do you have any wrap-up comments? Because
Oh yeah, I do have wrap-up comments.
I've asked that this is the last time through, and so questions and then wrap up.
Yes, wrap up is just, I'm really excited to see a lot of our active transportation stuff happening in here. I get that this is a very itty bitty tiny little wiggle room we have in this budget. And I am looking forward for parking garages to no longer be a part of our capital improvement plan someday. But I appreciate all the work you've put on this. This, I don't think people understand how much money is spent on just making sure the ground we walk on and the water that we have to drink is safe for everybody. So thank you for your work on that.
Okay, thank you. Any other final comments? Okay, I'll make mine and then we will adjourn. Oh, okay, Councilor Bonanno.
Sorry, I thought you were asking Councilmember Kick if she had any more final comments.
No.
Yeah, I just want to say thank you again for these reports. I think this is an incredibly important part of what we do. And we spend most of our money on providing services to our community, and the fundamental responsibilities we have to the citizenry is the vast majority of the money we take in, we spend back on services to the community. So I just think it's really important that we remember we have very little margin for discretionary things, and certainly have to continue the financial, just how responsibly we handle our finances. We did a very good job because of the past council and the past staff's work to put us in this position. We're very fortunate we can move forward with a lot of the things that we've planned for a long time. We could have been in a very different position if we hadn't worked so hard to build up those reserves. And even in spite of that, we have very little wiggle room. So I think we should continue that level of austerity to some degree, and just good, solid, rational fiscal responsibility. So thanks again, and it's going to be an exciting couple of years.
Okay, thank you, Vice Mayor Monroe.
I've pretty much made my wrap-up comments along the way, but I did want to take one last opportunity to say thank you very much. This is a superb job, and I really appreciate all the work.
Okay, what my comments are, I think both presentations were excellent. The financial, I've gone through several of these financial presentations over the years, and they always are very good. And I think that I want to highlight that was brought up earlier by the councilor, I think Councilor Bonanno, the redoing the refinancing was really a good move to lock that in. You see in the papers now that interest rates are likely to rise, and with all the money being printed, it's got to happen someday. Let's see, I have I got a note here. I want to see if I can read my own handwriting. And the other thing I think that you asked for was that what we approve, and he said it's going to come back on the consent calendar, that we're basically approving putting any excess into the CIP fund balance. So in terms of the direction, you needed that tonight, right, in order bring it back the way it is?
That is correct, Honorable Mayor.
Pardon, you guys, I heard both of you, but I didn't hear either. What basically is that a yes?
So yes, we do need that direction. So if the council is comfortable with that direction, and I saw several people nodding, 1, 2, 3, 4.
Well, the still picture, yeah, there you go, you got it. Okay, so I wanted to make sure we got that in there.
Thank you.
And then again, it's an impressive list of all the things that we're getting done, have gotten done, and will be getting done in the capital improvement program. And I think the bottom line, so that's great, but the bottom line is that we have a clear need to figure out how to fund the non-enterprise. The 40 million need and the 16 million actual shows a major deficit, and that's why many years ago I initiated the capital asset program. And so I think you just want to highlight for everybody watching, that is something we're going to have to deal with, and there's no way to do it without additional revenue sources in my mind. And I would just want to have the city manager affirm what I just said, or Doug.
Honorable Mayor, this is your city manager, Mark Roberts, and you are correct. We will need additional revenue, and your staff's looking at a variety of different things for us to ultimately come to you with first, and then work with the community to see what ultimately works for the community to move us into a place where we're more financially feasible over the long run.
And I think it's also important to note that any kind of issues where you're trying to maintain assets, you can't let it go too far or the problem gets out of control and it's way more expensive. So we're going to have to deal with this sooner and later. And I really appreciate all the work that's being done around the capital asset management. So I want to ask, do you have all the direction and reactions you needed tonight?
Yes, at this point, your staff does have the direction to bring back your final operating budget and final capital improvement program for your consideration at your June meeting.
Okay, well, thank you. And I want to point out to everyone that, we saw at the beginning that the pandemic was a major hit to us. And I wanted to thank the staff and everyone for responding well and for figuring out how we can manage going forward. So thank you. With that, we'll now adjourn to a regular city council meeting on May 24th at 7 p.m. held virtually using Zoom. And again, I'm urging everyone in the public comment period to keep their comments to 1 minute. Thank you. And we're
Thank you,
adjourned.
everyone. Bye.
Everyone.